Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Mary LaPlante. I'm Vice President of Client Services for Digital Clarity Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our May Get Clarity webinar, Changing the World of Work, Why Social is Broken and How to Fix It. Today we take a clear-eyed look at the adoption of social practices and technologies within our companies. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've learned much about capturing value from largely external uses. But when it comes to internal applications, many organizations have been unable to tap into the potential of social technologies and practices to improve collaboration and communication within their own virtual four walls. In today's webinar, we make the case that enterprise social will continue to falter as long as the focus is on A, the tools and practices, and or B, the benefits to employees. Social business will flourish when it's used to address a fundamental shift in business conditions, namely the empowerment of consumers and the consequent need for all firms to master customer experience management, or CEM. A few housekeeping notes before we start. Our webinar is being recorded this morning. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the replay so you can share that with colleagues who are unable to attend today. We will answer questions at the end, but you don't need to wait until the end to submit them. You can enter them in the question window on the GoToWebinar console at the, I think on the bottom right side of your screen. We're live tweeting the event using our handle at @just_clarity, shown in the footer of today's visuals. For those of you who may not be familiar with Digital Clarity Group, we are a research-based advisory firm focused on the technologies and practices that drive customer experience management in the digital age. Our clients are enterprise adopters, technology suppliers, and service providers who build and deploy solutions for customer experience management. We conduct and publish research, we offer consulting services, and we're recognized thought leaders in the markets that we cover. Our social business expert is my colleague Tim Walters, partner and principal analyst at DCG. Tim's photo is the 5th from the left on the ribbon across the top of the slide, should you wish to put a face to the voice in today's webinar. Tim is a frequent and well-respected contributor to the industry conversations around managing experience. At DCG, he covers digital disruption, social collaboration and the future of work, the technologies and practices within the CEM footprint, and translation and globalization. Tim has most recently authored the CEM Imperative, and he is a primary contributor to our Guide to Service Providers for Web Content and Customer Experience Management. Prior to DCG, Tim was a senior analyst and advisor at Forrester Research, and he served as Director of International Marketing and Strategy for FatWire Software, where he was instrumental in charting the transition from WCEM to Web Experience Management, or WEM. The CEM Imperative paper and a sample of the new European edition of the Guide to Service Providers are available for download from our website, digitalclaritygroup.com. And with that, I'm going to turn the virtual microphone over to Tim.
Great. Thanks very much, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. These are my two favorite topics, customer experience management and enterprise social, and it's especially interesting to talk about the ways in which they come together and I think kind of mutually support each other, and that's the gist of the argument or the explanation today. Let me begin with a little bit of an explanation because many people think that social isn't broken, and some of the stuff that we say in terms of how it needs to be empowered may be taken as attacks upon social, and that's precisely not the case. So the title, Social Now with a question mark, was taken from the recent Social Now conference in Amsterdam, and the invitation by Anna Nevis and the other organizers to keynote that rather brilliant annual event was an occasion for me to take stock of the state of enterprise social now, today, and like so many others, and probably most of you who are listening, I've been an advocate and a supporter of enterprise social technologies and processes and practices from the beginning. Now, last 6 or 8 years, depending on when you date the emergence of what we used to call Enterprise 2.0. And like you, I've been excited about the impact that social and collaboration and teamwork could have in our working lives, not only in terms of increasing productivity and efficiency, but even more so in terms of the potential to fundamentally shake up and reorder and perhaps even revolutionize the way that work and workplaces and work relationships are structured and organized. And so for the purposes of this webinar, as well as for my own wider interest in my research agenda and my consulting work with clients, and again, I think probably for most of you as vendors or analysts or most importantly, internal advocates and practitioners of internal social and collaboration, the question is not only, to what extent social tools and practices are being implemented and used and embraced in the enterprise, but also how effective they have been and can be in transforming the world of work. So the question in my title means really, like, where are we with social? How far have we come? How far do we have to go? Are we even on the right path? Do we think we're on the right path? And if we're not making the progress that we expected or hoped to make, why not? And what is to be done about that? So, studies consistently show, we know, that 70% or more of all employees are disengaged, resigned, disaffected, uninvested, just punching the clock. Now that's depressing all by itself. But we also know that creating a workplace in which employees feel engaged and valued and empowered delivers clear benefits for the mental health of the employee as well as the financial health of the organization, as you see in the metrics on this slide. So how are we doing with social now? The answer is lots of hard work, lots of enthusiasm, many, many local victories and successes as constantly reported by consultants, vendors, and the companies themselves. But in the big picture, success is not yet within reach. Now, Jane McConnell has done as much as anyone, perhaps more than anyone, in recent years to push the social enterprise transformation, and in particular to turn intranets from those mostly moribund cesspools of outdated, irrelevant, and universally ignored information into living, breathing, productive, and collaborative workspaces. And to this end, she's been surveying work and workplaces for several years. And her 2014 report, which is a report on the surveys that she did in Q3 and Q4 of 2013, was just released a couple of months ago, and it provides a very convenient and very clear view of the state of social now. So first, the growth in deployment is slowing dramatically. So in Jane's original graphic, which I reproduce here, she notes that the deployment rate has, or percentage of companies deploying, has increased by a multiple of 5 since the early days in 2009. But I added just for clarification to show that that increase was nearly 80% between 2012 and 13, and then only 8% between 2013 and 2014. Secondly, there are decent numbers for usage. Impressive numbers for early adopters in terms of actually using the social technologies that they've deployed. But as you can see, it's not crossing the chasm to the mainstream in Jeffrey Moore's sense. So 25% of the majority companies that she surveyed have enterprise social in production use, whereas nearly 60% of the early adopters. And when you look at the actual usage, they seem like decent numbers, at least for the early adopters, 24% and 21% in those top two categories. But note that these circled results are for monthly and weekly usage or activities, frequency for enterprise social network use. And my question is, what about daily usage? What about hourly usage? If social practices were truly embedded in the work lives of early adopters or employees, one would expect them to use the tools regularly, if not constantly. By that I mean on a daily or even hourly basis. And so it's no surprise that when asked about the extent to which social networking plays a role in daily work habits, only 5% of the early adopters reported achieved in most cases. And among the mainstream, the number is virtually null. So let's look at some other data. MT Sloan surveyed over 2,500 executives in 99 countries and 25 industries in 2013. And they found, I'll just read this, when asked to rank their company's social business maturity on a scale of 1 to 10, more than half gave their company a score of 3 or below, only 31% gave a rating of 4 to 6, and 17% ranked their company at 7 or above. Okay, so these numbers are not great, but nevertheless, nearly 1/3 relate themselves in the middle of the scale, and almost 1 in 5, that's close to 20%, say they are at the top end. But the problem here is in the footnote to this slide. Note what they considered when they asked about social business maturity. They include external social sites such as Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., internal social networks like Cisco's Learning Network, and social-based data and marketing intelligence practices. Those 3 things I would exclude from our discussion of enterprise social. And then fourthly, they also included enterprise social tools such as Jive, Yammer, and custom-built enterprise social platforms. So these numbers are not representative at all of if we focus exclusively on enterprise social tools. Finally, Accenture, this is a May 2013 survey of 1,000 business leaders and 4,000 employees. We start out with some good news for a change. 77% of business and IT leaders say their companies are currently using social collaboration technologies. That's wonderful and astonishing in light of some of the other metrics that we've seen. And over 80% say that they're currently using social over 80% of those companies that are currently using them say they want to use more of them in the future. And that would indicate that they're happy with the way that they're contributing to their business and producing business value. However, what are these social tools that these companies are using? By far, the leading so-called social technologies are, again, Facebook and Twitter. And finally, Accenture concludes, business and IT decision makers have a false sense of accomplishment when it comes to social collaboration. So we could go on and on. And again, I fully acknowledge that there are dozens or hundreds or probably by now thousands of surveys and analyses and case studies that show demonstrable positive impacts and outcomes from social tools and practices at work. In no sense whatsoever do I want to claim or even suggest or even hint that social business is a crock, as Dennis Howlett once said about Enterprise 2.0. Nevertheless, are you getting tired of Flappy Bird? Nevertheless, I think that precisely we as advocates and believers, if you are that, in the value of enterprise social and organizational transformation have to take seriously the findings from the reports that we've cited, and there are many others, and we have to admit that social has not had the impact in the enterprise that we hoped and expected some few years ago, and we have to ponder then why it now seems to be no longer progressing rapidly, indeed slowing dramatically, evidently, and perhaps even in a decline that could lead to irrelevance. So why isn't social working? In the past, for example, in an earlier DCG webinar presented with my colleague Kathy McKnight, which I believe is still available on our website on intranets and social intranets, we've analyzed how these 4 factors have played a role. These are certainly not the only 4 factors, but they are, I think, all significant. So quickly, first, platform megalomania. That refers to the overly ambitious and massively disruptive and usually impossibly resource-intensive vision, or trying to actually implement the vision, of what sometimes is still called, what we used to call a knowledge worker dashboard or an information workplace that's available in principle to every worker across an enterprise and is customized and personalized for their own work habits and workflows and responsibilities. That is not, there's nothing wrong with that in principle, except that it's such a large project that it's no surprise that so few companies have tried to take that on. Secondly, the inattention to supporting ad hoc, unformalized, and unpredictable knowledge-based processes that depend on the actors and the quality of the information that's available to them rather than on the formal structure of a repeatable business process flow that you might actually model and put together and chart out in a business process management system. Thirdly, misapprehending the similarities and, more importantly, the differences between digitally enabled social practices at home, in our personal and private lives, and those at work with colleagues in the pursuit of producing, ultimately, business value. And finally, that relates very, very closely to the resulting overemphasis or misplaced emphasis on employees as people. And that's a purposefully provocative remark at the end, which I'll now go on to explain. So today, I want to boil down those four factors, and many, many others as well, into two fallacies that I think afflict and restrict our thinking about enterprise social. The tool fallacy is fairly well recognized. We know that despite the fact that humans are inherently social and prefer to work collaboratively, and despite the fact that employees are humans, it won't do to simply make social tools available and say, have at it. We know this, but we don't always put it into practice. We don't always follow our own insights about it. And that's why so many social initiatives have exhibited, and I think it's fair to say still exhibit, what I've come to call the lemming curve. That is, a rapid, enthusiastic embrace of a new tool. In my personal experience, this was Yammer, but it could have been anything, followed a couple of weeks later by the equally rapid decline as adoption falls off the cliff. And why? Not because there's something inherently wrong with the tool or the solution or the practices built up around it, but because workers quickly determine that it doesn't help them do their work, or at least they can't see how it should and does help them do their work, and since they're busy, they don't have time to figure out how it could and should help their work. So this is expressed as well in Gartner's confident prediction that 80% of enterprise social projects will fail, that is, fail to meet their goals, through at least 2015 or 2016. And it is, I think, the basic force behind the statistics that we started with, like Jane McConnell's, about the still very limited or rather limited impact of social at work. So a preliminary conclusion, when we look for what will enable and drive the desired fundamental transformations of the world at work, the mere availability of social tools and associated practices is not the answer. Secondly, the people fallacy. Broadly speaking, this is the second inhibitor, and this is not so widely recognized. In fact, it's somewhat controversial, and I have to admit that I might even be wrong about it, but now I'm going to make the case for it. So Jane McConnell, again, nicely summarizes the situation. She says, the what, the social platform itself, is already dealt with, at least for early adopters. Now we're tackling the big issue of how. Now, I would modify this in light of the statistics from her report that we've just seen, and this is also a text from that same 2014 report. I would modify this to say, first, that the what, the social platform itself and the tools, is not so much already dealt with as recognized as itself inadequate. That's the tool fallacy. And that in addition, I would add that the how of the social transformation, in addition to the how, we need to ask why. Why will that social transformation be affected as well as how? The first reason why we may want to change the world of work is that the traditional structure, frankly, isn't working very well, very clearly isn't working very well. So this is a widely cited metric and graphic, which you may have seen before, from Deloitte's Institute for the Edge. And it shows that U.S. firms have become significantly less productive. Return on assets and return on invested capital are 1/4 what they were in 1965. Moreover, that traditional organization is increasingly recognized as undesirable in itself. So Steve Denning, who writes very, very frequently on traditional management models and what he calls radical management as a replacement for it, notes that firms have become beholden to the primary goal of increasing shareholder value, which even the arch capitalist Jack Welch now calls the dumbest idea in the world. And to the end of increasing shareholder value, managers direct and control the workers. Work is coordinated by rules. It is often highly bureaucratic. The overriding rule is that of efficiency, or their overriding value. Communications are mostly top-down, aimed at maintaining control of the workers, and it revolves around bosses and reporting structures. Now, we see a growing movement to dismantle these established hierarchies and operational models at work. And a relatively new group called Change Agents Worldwide is really exciting. I think you should check them out. And it consists of many prominent organizational and management experts, and they've recently published this collection of essays that I feature here called, tellingly, Changing the World of Work. And so, for example, they say that it is necessary for organizations to transform the way they operate, to challenge their structure and purpose, and to rethink the very nature of work. And they argue collectively that change in the workplace starts and ends with people, and that the future is about unleashing the power of people. So you can see how this goes back to what I'm still going to try to call the people fallacy. Businesses and leaders need to align with our inherent social characteristics, our human inherent social characteristics. And finally, this last quote, managers must recognize that each and every one of their staff are unique individuals with passions, dreams, ideas, and a spirit of independence. And you can just pause for a moment to ask yourself, in your own work life, whether you've been at work for a few years or for a few decades, how often that vision has been realized in the way in which the company and your managers actually treated you, or you treated your reports. So frankly, I think this is very exciting stuff. We clearly are here at the point that I alluded to at the outset about why enterprise social is not just about squeezing a few percentage points of productivity out of some overworked workers, but about supporting basic wholesale change in how we organize work and relate to each other in the workplace. And the change agents remind me of another prominent analyst of organizational transformation. And this is one that we might call the mother of all change agents. And if you don't recognize the miserable handwriting or the caricature at the bottom of the slide, you might be familiar with this famous declaration about changing the world of work. So Karl Marx wrote in the 1840s, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it." And for our purposes, this would better be rendered as, "The social tools have only impacted the world of work in various ways. The point is to change it." However, in order to see how Marx said, and see how what Marx says in this very simple thesis, 2 sentences in English, actually 1 sentence in German, can help us understand the fate of enterprise social and how to revive it, we have to first focus on what he does not say in these 2 simple sentences. So it begins, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways." You might expect him to then say, "They should rather change it." Instead of only interpreting, "They should change it." Or, "We must change it. They're incapable or don't want to. We will change it." Or a directive, "You ought to go and change it. It is your task in the world to do that." Or, "Someone, anyone, please change the world," instead of only interpreting it. But he says nothing of the sort. In fact, the English is, "The point is to change it." In German, "Es kommt drauf an, sie zu verändern." And literally, the German means, "It arrives thereupon to change it." Now, the question is, why does Marx use this very, very strange formulation? Why doesn't he just say, you ought to change it, or "we will change it"? And my argument is that Marx does not designate an agent that will execute the change that he calls for, and he doesn't do that. That is, he purposefully leaves out the subject because he wants to emphasize that change is not just a matter of people changing their minds, of deciding to change, of deciding, for example, that they ought to treat their direct reports and every employee as a unique individual with passions, ideas, and so on and so forth. The fact is, people do effect change, but only in the context and in conjunction with a change in the conditions of work or of the world. So in order to test this thesis, let's look at 3 instances that are related to what we've just been covering, where changing conditions seem to be, or rather must be at work behind the scenes, behind what is evidently happening or what is claimed as the primary dynamic. So the first one is, we've just heard that employers have to recognize that each and every one of their staff are unique individuals and so on and so forth. And again, I think this is a very valuable goal. But my question is, wasn't it true for our parents or our grandparents or for older workers, such as myself, who have been working for several decades and are now nearing retirement? In other words, what has changed that makes this demand to respect individuals at work pertinent today in a way that it was not pertinent or relevant or forceful 10 or 20 or 30 years ago? Or again, Steve Denning has pointed out that our recent focus on the benefits and value of teamwork and collaboration and social in the enterprise is in fact by no means unique or unprecedented. Management gurus and consultants have regularly highlighted this value and instituted programs to change the workplace, often with rather widespread results, in at least the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s and the 60s and the 80s and the 90s and the early years of this millennium. And then at some point, for some reason, those initiatives were defunded and did not achieve their ultimate effects. So again, what is different today that makes it any more likely that our efforts, these similar efforts to those that have gone on virtually every decade for the last 100 years, will succeed when they have so often failed in the past? And finally, everybody's obsessed today with accommodating millennials. So this particular article says, for example, this is a typical exclamation, these young whippersnappers are making demands of their new bosses, and surprisingly, companies are jumping through hoops to accommodate them. But again, previous generations also had unorthodox worldviews and strange habits that they brought to the workplace. So think, for example, just the most obvious one, the so-called 68ers that protested in the streets. They founded communes in Volkswagen buses. They outright advocated revolution. And yet they went rather quietly to work for traditional firms and traditional organizations in the mid to late 1970s. So again, what has changed today that makes it necessary, let alone possible, to accommodate millennials in a way that employers did not have to accommodate previous generations entering the workplace? So if we pause again to take stock, social tools alone will not change the world of work, and people, that is, a focus on people, their needs, their habits, their inherent characteristics, their dreams and ideas, etc., will not either, because it's been attempted so often in the past without success. Or, I should rather say more precisely, if a focus on people is going to make the difference and enable real, serious, widespread adoption of enterprise social and to truly create a social enterprise, then it can only be because some fundamental change in the conditions because of some fundamental change in the conditions in which businesses operate. So the question is simply, in closing, basically, what is that change? Is it the famous digital disruption? Not exactly. It is rather the fact that digital disruption has empowered consumers, inverted the relationship between buyers and sellers, created the unavoidable requirement and demand to adopt what Forrester calls outside-in thinking, to delight customers, as Steve Denning has it, and to recognize and embrace the imperative for customer experience management, as we say in the white paper available on our site. So I don't have a lot of time to go through some of the metrics to substantiate this transformation and this shift to empowered consumers, but you're all very familiar with it. And I like to say that if you really want to understand the force of the expectation for positive experiences and what makes up a great customer experience, look into a mirror. However, it's very, very important that you look into that mirror and see yourself as a consumer. As soon as we enter the workplace, whether it's in our own home office or in a tower somewhere, we exercise an incredible ability to stop thinking of what the consumer wants and thinking of our own consumer desires, and to think of ourselves exclusively as employees who then have to apologize and justify the shortcomings of the company rather than seek to eradicate them. So very quickly, for example, 90% in U.S. consumers in late 2011, so that number is much higher now, said that they not only would consider switching business to a competitor due to a poor experience, they said that they already had at that time. And nearly 90%, 86%, said they would pay extra, up to 25% extra, to ensure a better customer experience. And in 2012, in a survey of over 1,300 executives globally, they were asked to estimate the total cost to their company of not providing positive customer experiences. And rather astonishingly, they said 20% of total revenue. That's an unbelievable number, and you can just do the math for your own company or for your clients' companies or for your prospects' companies. And even if that number is for some reason off, I mean, 1,300 senior executives worldwide is not a bad survey audience. But nevertheless, even if it's off by even if it's only half that or a quarter that or an eighth that much, and even if you're thinking of a company, a relatively small company with $50 million in revenue, that's $1.25 million in revenue lost to poor customer experience every single year. And again, it's probably increasing now from the 2012 survey. So this is the way we put it in the CEM imperative paper. Customers are empowered by information and shared opinions, and they are emboldened by choice. They have developed an appetite for rich and rewarding interactions, and they rarely hesitate to seek alternatives when disappointed. Increasingly, companies will succeed and fail according to the quality of the experiences that they offer. So this validates the earlier thesis. Focusing on people, that is, as employees, as people, and people, that is, as employees, and as people, and focusing on people as workers, focusing on people, that is, employees as people, and people as workers, and focusing on social tools and practices can and will change the world of work, but only if and because we recognize that these are the enabling responses to the revolutionary change in conditions brought about when digital disruption, primarily mobility and social practices, have empowered consumers in the way that they have. So in conclusion, what does it mean? And this is a very busy slide, but it's actually meant to communicate something very simple. It means that the three topics that dominate my discussions and many other discussions today, customer experience, enterprise social, and broader organizational transformation cannot, in my view, and will not be achieved, any one of these three will not be achieved and reach the goals that we have set for them or their advocates have set for them in isolation. But at the same time, it means that they can and should and must be understood together and can and should and must be executed in concert. Why? Because for most companies, in most industries, in most parts of the planet today, and increasingly so every hour, every day and every hour, customer experience is the determining condition of business competition and success. Many, many other things are, of course, important. The supply chain has to be rationalized, the data properly analyzed, the best talent acquired and retained, the regulations observed, etc., etc. But finally, it is the quality of the experiences that you offer that count. And so that dedication to meeting the expectations and demands of empowered consumers is imperative in the sense of without it, your business will undoubtedly fail in the short or the longer term. But then in turn, that means that customer experience and customer experience management provides the business justification and the business value focus that enterprise social and the broader efforts for organizational transformation have lacked for so long. Matter of fact, there's going to be a tweet jam later on today about the ROI of enterprise social. And as you can guess from my presentation, it's a very, very important discussion to have, but I think that it's missing the point that we need to think in terms of how social helps achieve the overbearing demand to respond to empowered consumers. And the result is that because they've lacked this, this business justification, that's why so many well-intentioned initiatives in social or in organizational transformation have been launched, funded, endorsed, they begin to gain traction, and then they are defunded or withdrawn or allowed to die on the vine because some so-called larger business issues took a priority. But if, or rather since, social in the service of customer experience management is quite simply protected from this fate because CEM is the highest business priority. Finally, and this is a broader discussion, enterprise social and business transformation provide some of the means for companies to successfully respond to the CEM imperative and to compete successfully in this customer-centric era. So in other words, you see how the three areas pursued independently, like we're going to obsessively focus on enterprise social and getting it adopted and widely used, or we're going to focus on organizational transformation and making sure that we recognize the inherent value of each employee, or if we're going to pay attention to the imperative for customer experience management, any one of those pursued independently or in isolation will be missing the support that it requires from the other two. And so social and organizational transformation receive the justification of ultimately the ROI, the business value legitimation that they've so long been lacking when they are used to drive and support customer experience management. So in conclusion, this is the last slide. Social is not appreciated if held to traditional standards, and it will never be appreciated if held to traditional ROI standards. Social will not be widely adopted either if it is judged by and aspires only to the goals of efficiency and productivity and cost reduction and so forth. In other words, helping overworked workers work even more. Social will not be successful if it is a collaborative facade on traditional hierarchical organizations. That means that, again, social and organizational transformation have to work together. And social will not be effective if it serves as a Band-Aid on the gaping wounds of non-customer-centric companies. Again, social, organizational transformation, and CEM need to work together. And finally, CEM is the inescapable business imperative and provides the necessary business focus for social, organizational change, and ultimately for changing the world of work and the future of work. That's it for my slides, and I'll turn it back to Mary.
Great. Thanks, Tim. The collection of ideas presented in the last 40 minutes or so has really been tremendous. Yesterday, for the benefit of our audience, we did a run-through, and I told Tim at the end that I really liked the dissection of the Marx quote in particular, pointing out that there were conscious decisions about the words, not just the vagaries of translation from the original German. Tim, we do have a couple of questions, and I want to encourage our audience to offer their own, but I have an observation, perhaps a question for you, while we gather those additional questions from our audience. You know, since Digital Clarity Group covers the CEM adoption, and we know that companies, many companies, have not yet reacted to shift to driving their businesses based on customer experience, managing that experience. You know, if an organization hasn't recognized the need to do that, they're already behind the curve. But we know many have recognized but not yet reacted or are in the process of reacting. If based on what we've talked about today, you really need that new engine to be driving the car, what can companies do who really see an opportunity to make their businesses more social internally while their companies really, make that shift towards driving their businesses with a focus on the customer? What's possible in the interim, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. So I'll convert that into a version of that question and tell me if this isn't fair. So that is, basically, how, because so many companies have either not yet gotten started, or rather more often don't know where to start and how to start. What do you do even if you wake up and wholeheartedly want to embrace customer experience management? What next? What actually happens when you get to the office? And I've become increasingly fond of this notion that you should focus on, initially focus on individual customer journeys. And customer journey here is used in a very particular way, and I like the way that McKinsey analysts use this nowadays. It's not synonymous with customer life cycle or the overall customer experience or anything like that, which very often customer journey is used in that way. But it's used to designate a particular closed end-to-end customer interaction. So for example, like onboarding a new cable television client. So I'm a customer of one cable television company. I won't name any of them that I'm familiar with because they're all in Germany. And I want to switch to a different provider. So what's going to happen? I'm going to start doing research on my own. No company's even aware that I'm doing this yet, but they might be able to reach me via content marketing or something. Then I'm going to go onto their site. Then I'm going to look for more research. Then I'm going to sign up for a newsletter. Then I'm going to ask for some information or to have somebody contact me. Then I might have a conversation with the call center. I might actually go to a storefront. And then a technician comes to my home and installs a set-top box or something. And then say I have an issue and I need to call the customer service. I need to resolve this issue. And so forth. And eventually, let's say that this customer journey ends when I renew, which indicates that I'm an advocate or happy with the service. So from the beginning to the end there, that's an overall customer journey. It's manageable, or at least much more manageable than talking about customer experience in general. And you can look at it and then say, okay, what are the steps in this journey, right? Do journey mapping. And very importantly, where are there gaps, obviously? Where are things broken? Where are there gaps? Where is this not working well? Where is the experience poor or non-exceptional, actually? And how can it be fixed? And then you look at the social tools or the organizational changes. So you're not looking at what people refer to as social for the sake of social. You're looking at it in order to fix a known issue, to address or alleviate a known issue in a known process with a known business outcome. And that helps remove the question of the ROI of social. Why are we doing this? Well, because we want employees to collaborate more effectively. No, we're doing it because by collaborating more effectively between the call center and the technicians in this particular process, we're going to reduce the percentage of unhappy outcomes by 90%, something like that. That's the value of the social technology. That's the value of implementing and allowing people to work together and maybe flattening hierarchies and so on and so forth. So the customer experience outcome drives and justifies the changes that you're making on the social and the organizational level.
So that lens on customer journeys, even at the sort of the well-defined task level, is a good way to get started, even if the broader organization is kind of not got its CEM act together.
Exactly. Yep.
Got it. Okay. We do have a question here that I think raises an interesting point, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about. This question was posed to us when you had the slide up about the disparity between all the goodness and the conclusion. I think it was in your early slides about how business leaders and IT in particular overestimate or don't have a false sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, exactly. The Accenture study. Yeah.
Right. I'll paraphrase the question, but it's essentially, how do we communicate? IT thinks things are working. We've built a social platform. I hear the word SharePoint anytime people say social. How do I have an effective communication or conversation with IT who thinks the social problem is solved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one, what does solved mean? So in other words, what counts as success? And if you ask IT, I mean, I'm a little hesitant about the formulation of the question itself because it seems that whoever we are or I am, I have an antagonistic relationship to IT, and of course the idea, of course, would be to defuse any kind of antagonism. But if IT thinks that social is solved, if that's their position, then they must be able to define what solved means and what criteria count as solving and so on and so forth. And if we're talking about social, again, I hate this phrase, but social for the sake of social, then we could say, okay, well, you think that that social is solved or social is successful when, just for example, it reduces the number of independent file shares on desktop machines or on people's individual computers. Whereas we think that it should rather count when 65% of all employees are regularly interacting in the activity feed or something like that. And then you can just have a debate about which criteria do you want to embrace together as an organization and agree upon what counts as success. If, however, we go back to the previous discussion, and it's not social in isolation, but social in order to address a particular business issue within a high-value customer journey, and in order to improve the overall customer experience within that journey, then you know why you were adopting it, and whether or not it's been successful or whether that issue has been solved should be directly readable out of the quality of the customer experience in that particular business process.
Okay, that makes sense. We do have one other question as we're coming up here sort of towards the end. And this question actually, it's a common one that many of us who have been around technology for decades have often encountered. And it came in when you had the lemming slide up. And essentially it's, my company does a good job at incentivizing initial participation, but we seem to fail when it comes to sustaining participation.
Yep.
Is there any research or advice that can be offered so that we can figure out how to keep the momentum going?
Yeah. So I can't name very particular things that you should look at or that you can download and distribute and so forth, but I'll certainly take a look and see if I can come up with anything if you want to contact Mary or myself in order to follow up on it. But the word research is important here because one of the ways, perhaps the primary way in which you can attack this issue or address this problem and help resolve it is research. Think about, understand what work issues you're trying to solve or what work processes you're trying to improve, and hopefully, ultimately, how those contribute to a customer experience. But let's just stick with the employees for now. So when you introduce a social platform, let's just say it's an activity stream, as I noted at that time in the lemming slide, very often this is just introduced and say, hey, everybody, now we've got X. Go use it. And people are really excited about it, as this person indicates. But then they're left to their own devices to figure out how it's supposed to actually help them do their work. And either it's not so much that people are clever enough to figure that out, it's that they're too busy. I don't have 2 hours unexpectedly out of my busy week in order to now sit down and figure out how I'm supposed to use this activity stream and how it might help me in my, in communications with a team on the other side of the globe or something like that. So someone else needs to do that work for them. You need to, obviously in conjunction with employee research and very careful analysis of the business processes that they're supporting and the responsibilities that they have, so that you can not only say, hey, everybody, now we have this great tool, go have at it, but you can say, hey, everybody, we have this great tool. Here are the ways in which you can use it. Here are typical workflows. Here are groups and communities that if you are in role X, you might very well consider subscribing to now because we think this is going to help you when you're looking for Y in business process Z and so forth. That kind of, priming the pump, as it were, providing the igniter so that people aren't responsible for building the social fire themselves by rubbing the social activity sticks together, but that they're being shown the way, and then make it possible for them to get going, and then once they do have that incentive and that clarity about where they're supposed to be going and how this is actually supposed to make their work better and easier and more effective, then you've got a very good chance that they'll invest enough effort in making it successful.
Right. Great answer. Well, I think that's the end of our questions coming in from the audience. Just want to remind everyone who's on the phone that you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the replay. If you've enjoyed Tim's remarks and found them thought-provoking, please feel free to share within your organizations. The CEM imperative, which Tim has mentioned a couple of times in our session this morning, is available as a free download from our site. And for any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to Tim directly or to any other member of the Digital Clarity team. And we thank you for your time today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.